History remembers its conquerors, those rare figures who bend the arc of empires to their will. Yet few have cast as long a shadow as the man who, for 16 years, held Rome itself in a grip of terror. His name echoes still across the millennia, a name that once made the mightiest republic in the ancient world tremble. Between 264 and 146 BC, two Mediterranean powers engaged in a series of conflicts that would determine the fate of the Western world. These confrontations, the Punic Wars, pitted rising Rome against established Carthage in a struggle not merely for territory or wealth, but for survival itself. Their battlefields stretched from Sicily to Spain, from North Africa to the Italian peninsula. Their armies clashed on land and sea, leaving hundreds of thousands dead in their wake. From this crucible of fire emerged legendary figures: Regulus, who chose torture and death over dishonor; Scipio, whose brilliance earned him the epithet Africanus; and towering above them all, a Carthaginian general whose military genius nearly brought Rome to ruin. His audacity in crossing the Alps with war elephants remains one of history's most astonishing feats. His tactical mastery at Cannae still features in military academies worldwide. His name became so feared that Roman mothers would quiet unruly children with whispered warnings: Hannibal ad portas. Hannibal is at the gates. This is the story of that man, of his sacred oath sworn in boyhood, of his relentless pursuit of vengeance against a rising empire, of brilliant victories and ultimate defeat, of a clash between civilizations that would shape the Mediterranean world for centuries to come. This is the story of Hannibal Barca and the Punic Wars, a tale of ambition and honor, of triumph and catastrophe, of a moment when the fate of Western civilization hung in the balance, dependent upon the decisions of one extraordinary mind. The Mediterranean sun cast long shadows across the ancient stones of Carthage as a young boy observed his father prepare for conflict. This was the son of Hamilcar Barca, heir to both a legacy and a sacred oath. It was the year 237 BC, and the wounds of defeat still festered in the proud maritime city-state. The First Punic War had concluded 9 years earlier, leaving the once mighty North African power humiliated, stripped of Sicily, and burdened with crushing indemnities. The Roman Republic had emerged as more than a rival. It had become an existential threat. In the temple of Baal Hammon, where sacred fires burned eternal, the Carthaginian general placed his 9-year-old heir's small hand upon the altar. The vow the child swore there would resonate through history, never to befriend Rome. This was no juvenile promise made in ignorance. The temple's shadows seemed to deepen around the boy, as if the gods themselves leaned closer to witness this covenant. This pledge would bind the youth more surely than chains of iron, setting in motion events that would nearly bring the rising Italian power to its knees. The North African metropolis had once been the undisputed mistress of the Western Mediterranean. Founded by Phoenician settlers from Tyre, this commercial center had grown into a maritime empire, its wealth built upon the foundations of trade rather than conquest. Purple dyes, silver, tin, ivory, and gold flowed through its harbors. Its fleet was unrivaled, its merchants legendary. Yet the Latin city's inexorable ascent had changed everything. The initial confrontation between these powers had been fought primarily at sea, an irony that still burned in Punic hearts. The infantry-focused Romans had defeated Carthage in its own element. The forfeiture of Sicily, the first and most prized province, was but the beginning. The mercenary revolt that followed had nearly destroyed the metropolis from within. Only Hamilcar's military genius had preserved his homeland from destruction. As the seasons passed, and the boy matured under paternal guidance. The father sought to rebuild Carthaginian strength through a new strategy: the conquest of Iberia. The silver mines of Spain would replenish the depleted treasury. Its warriors would bolster military might. While the Senate gazed eastward toward the Hellenistic kingdoms, these Phoenician descendants would forge a new empire in the west. The young heir absorbed these lessons with uncanny aptitude. During daylight hours, he trained alongside the Numidian cavalry, learning to ride without saddle or bridle, to hurl javelins with deadly accuracy while at full gallop. As evening fell, the youth studied Greek literature and philosophy under learned tutors, developing intellectual prowess that would one day outmaneuver Rome's greatest commanders. Tragedy struck during the summer months of 229 BC. Hamilcar drowned while covering his army's retreat across the Jucar River, and leadership passed to his son-in-law, Hasdrubal. The adolescent continued his education in the crucible of the Iberian campaign, observing as this new leader expanded influence through diplomacy as much as military might, establishing Nova Carthago, New Carthage, as the seat of Punic power in the peninsula. The watchful Romans grew concerned. Some 3 years after Hamilcar's demise, they negotiated the Ebro Treaty with Hasdrubal, establishing that river as the northernmost boundary of Carthaginian influence. An uneasy peace prevailed, built upon foundations of mutual suspicion. Assassins claimed Hasdrubal's life as the 5th year of his command drew to a close. The expeditionary force then proclaimed the 25-year-old son of Hamilcar as their commander. These veterans saw in him his father's image, the same piercing gaze, the same natural authority. What remained invisible was the childhood oath still burning within, a promise that had shaped every aspect of his development. In the home city, the Council of Elders debated the wisdom of entrusting so much authority to such youthful hands. But the new general had already begun consolidating control over southern Iberia through lightning campaigns against restive tribes. This combination of diplomatic skill, strategic insight, and tactical brilliance silenced critics. Here emerged a new type of Punic leader, one who combined the mercantile cunning of his culture with military genius that seemed divinely inspired. The Republic watched from across the sea, not yet comprehending the gathering tempest. The Senate, preoccupied with affairs in Illyria and Macedonia, paid scant attention to reports from a distant province. They would soon learn to fear this new adversary. From atop the walls of the newly established city, the young commander gazed northward toward territories beyond the treaty boundary, his childhood vow echoing in memory. His father's spirit seemed present, urging advance. The strategic pieces aligned perfectly. Rome believed any future struggle would occur on familiar ground, the sea or Sicily. They never imagined war approaching from an unexpected direction, orchestrated by one who had studied their methods, understood their weaknesses, and sworn their destruction. The shadow of ancient Carthage was about to fall across the 7 hills themselves, carried by the most formidable military intellect of the classical world. The Iberian summer of 219 BC bore witness to a decisive moment. Saguntum, a prosperous city allied with Rome, yet positioned south of the Ebro boundary, represented both opportunity and provocation to Punic interests. The reports of its residents harassing Barcid allies provided the pretext the young commander had awaited. When emissaries from the Roman Senate arrived with stern warnings, they found themselves addressing empty air. The invading force had already departed for Saguntum, leaving diplomacy to wither in the Mediterranean heat. The die was cast. For 8 arduous months, the siege engines of the African army battered Saguntum's formidable walls, Inside the city, famine and desperation took root. Defenders hurled themselves into battle with the ferocity of the condemned, knowing Roman aid would surely arrive. Their faith proved misplaced. The Senate, paralyzed by internal debates and distant concerns, dispatched only words while their allies perished. As autumn leaves fell and winter descended, the assault continued unabated. Hamilcar's heir drove his engineers and troops beyond conventional limits, adapting tactics as circumstances demanded. When direct assault faltered, he ordered tunnels excavated beneath the defenses. When defenders collapsed one tunnel, 3 more appeared elsewhere. The final assault came during early spring. As the remaining Saguntine elders prepared terms of surrender, their citizens chose a different path. They constructed a massive pyre in the city centre and consigned themselves, their possessions, and their city to purifying flames, rather than submit to foreign rule. The conqueror stood amidst the ruins, watching smoke spiral toward indifferent gods. The immolation of Saguntum served its purpose. The Second Punic War had begun. When news reached the Seven Hills, public outrage erupted. The Senate dispatched envoys to the North African metropolis, demanding the general's surrender. The ruling council faced an impossible choice: abandon their most capable military leader or face Roman vengeance. An aged councillor named Hanno warned of disaster, reminding his peers of Roman naval superiority and the vulnerability of their coastal settlements. These cautious voices were drowned out by war fervour and the impassioned defence from the Barcid faction. After heated debate, the envoys received their answer. The treaty had specified the Ebro as the boundary, not Saguntum. No violation had occurred. No surrender would be forthcoming. The Roman delegation's response became legendary. Gathering his toga into a fold, the chief envoy addressed the council. "Here I carry both peace and war. Choose which you will receive." When the council president responded, "Give us whichever you prefer." The envoy let his garment fall open. "Then I give you war." The councillors replied with a single voice, "We accept it and shall prosecute it with the same spirit." Thus began the conflict that would determine a Mediterranean supremacy for centuries to come. Yet while Rome prepared for conventional warfare, assembling legions to invade Africa and Iberia, the Punic commander harbored plans that would shatter all precedent. As spring blossomed across the Iberian Peninsula in 218 BC, an extraordinary military enterprise took shape. While Roman strategists anticipated naval engagements and African landings, the Punic general prepared a maneuver of unprecedented audacity. He would strike not at Rome's distant territories, but at Italy itself, carrying devastation to the very heartland of the Republic. The force assembled at New Carthage presented a formidable spectacle: 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. Those towering beasts of destruction, whose very appearance sent terror through enemy ranks. Yet more remarkable than these numbers was the diversity of the host. Libyan heavy infantry marched alongside Numidian horsemen. Balearic slingers practiced their lethal art, while Iberian tribesmen sharpened distinctive falcata swords. This was no mere military campaign, but a coalition of peoples united by a single man's vision. The march northward commenced with astonishing speed. The multinational force reached and crossed the Ebro before Roman vessels could establish an effective blockade. The Pyrenees loomed ahead, their peaks still crowned with winter's lingering snow. Here, the first test of resolve emerged as local tribes contested every mountain pass. Through a blend of diplomatic persuasion and ruthless combat efficiency, the advance pressed on. Yet the unforgiving terrain and constant skirmishing took a toll. By the time they descended into Gaul, nearly 20,000 had been lost to desertion or battle. In Gaul, the general wielded gold and eloquence with equal effectiveness. Some tribal leaders saw opportunity in siding with this extraordinary figure from the south. Others recognized the existential threat his passage represented. Through careful negotiation and occasional shows of overwhelming might, safe passage through the lowlands was secured en route to the most daunting challenge yet. By early autumn, the vanguard reached the Alpine foothills. Here stood mountains unlike anything African or Iberian troops had encountered, vast, implacable barriers scraping the sky. Ancient sources record the leader's address to his faltering troops, reminding them that others had crossed these heights before. "We are not scaling the walls of heaven," he reportedly told them. "These mountains are surmountable by men, indeed, by women and children of the native tribes who call them home." What followed remains one of military history's most astonishing achievements. The ascent began along treacherous trails barely wide enough for single-file columns, let alone elephants and supply wagons. Mountain tribes hurled boulders from unreachable heights. Ravines claimed both men and beasts. Frigid winds tore at exposed skin, and snow and ice made every step perilous. The most daunting moment came when a rock slide obliterated the path ahead, leaving only a sheer cliff face. For 3 days, progress halted, while engineers undertook a seemingly impossible task. They built massive fires against the rock wall, then doused the heated surface with vinegar, causing it to fracture. Teams widened the resulting fissures until a new route emerged from the living stone. After 15 days of Alpine torment, the forward elements crested the final pass. The sight that greeted the exhausted soldiers was immortalized by Livy. The verdant plains of northern Italy spread below like a promised land. Their leader ascended a promontory alone and gazed upon the country of his sworn enemy. Behind them lay thousands of dead, lost to the mountains and ambushes. Ahead waited Roman legions, still unaware of the storm descending from the heights. When the final count was taken on the plains below, the cost of the daring passage became clear. Of the 90,000 infantry who had left New Carthage, only 20,000 remained fit for combat. Cavalry strength had dwindled from 12,000 to 6,000. Most of the elephants had perished. Only a few remained to strike terror into Italian hearts. Yet despite these losses, the Alpine crossing had achieved its strategic objective. The invading force now stood on Italian soil, having executed a maneuver Rome deemed impossible. More significantly, they arrived at a perfect moment to exploit growing tensions between the Republic and the Gallic tribes of the Po Valley. These disaffected peoples now flocked to their banner, swelling the ranks with fresh warriors eager to exact vengeance upon Rome. The passage of the Alps would be celebrated for centuries as a testament to human will. But for the architect of this feat, it was merely the opening move in a grand design to bring the Roman colossus to its knees. The initial encounters on Italian soil revealed a fundamental contrast in military philosophy. Roman warfare emphasized disciplined formation fighting, the manipular system that had conquered the peninsula. In contrast, Hannibal's approach displayed remarkable flexibility, adapting tactics to terrain and circumstance while exploiting the unique capabilities of his diverse troops. At the Ticinus River, the Republic dispatched a reconnaissance force led by the consul Publius Cornelius Scipio. What followed was not a pitched battle, but a cavalry engagement that demonstrated the superiority of Numidian and Spanish horsemen over their Roman counterparts. The consul himself suffered a severe wound, saved from death only by the valiant intervention of his teenage son, a youth who would later earn the cognomen Africanus and bring ultimate defeat to his father's adversary. The clash at the Trebia River in late December of 218 BC revealed Hannibal's tactical brilliance in full measure. Facing a Roman army under the consul Sempronius Longus, he placed his brother Mago with 2,000 elite troops in concealed positions near the battlefield. Then, through a series of provocations, he lured the Roman force across the freezing river at dawn. The legionaries arrived at the battlefront already exhausted, wet, and chilled to the bone. As the main forces engaged, Mago's hidden contingent struck the Roman rear with devastating effect. Caught between multiple threats, with their flanks collapsing under cavalry pressure, the legions broke formation. Nearly 20,000 Romans perished, while those who escaped owed their lives to a fortuitous rainstorm that obscured their retreat. Following these victories, the Punic force wintered in northern Italy, building alliances with Gallic tribes eager to throw off Roman domination. Spring brought a hazardous march through the flooded marshlands of the Arno. For 4 days and nights, the soldiers waded through brackish waters, unable to find dry ground for rest. Hannibal himself, mounted on the sole surviving war elephant, developed an eye infection that would ultimately claim the sight in his right eye, a permanent physical mark of his commitment to the campaign. The following year saw the debacle at Lake Trasimene, which elevated military deception to an art form. The new consul, Gaius Flaminius, eager to engage the invaders, pursued their apparent retreat along the lakeshore. Blinded by morning mist and focused solely on the visible elements of the enemy column, the Romans marched directly into a perfectly crafted ambush. Hannibal had positioned his troops on the surrounding heights overnight, creating an enclosed killing ground. When signal fires blazed on the hillsides, the trap closed. Thousands of warriors descended from concealed positions, striking the unprepared Roman column from all sides. Unable to form proper battle lines in the narrow passage between lake and hills, the legionaries fought as individuals rather than as the disciplined unit their tactics required. The result was slaughter. 15,000 Romans died, including Flaminius himself. Another 15,000 surrendered. A mere 6,000 escaped to carry news of the catastrophe to Rome. These successive defeats triggered unprecedented measures in the capital. The Senate appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator, granting him extraordinary powers to address the crisis. Recognizing the futility of direct confrontation, Fabius adopted a strategy of attrition, following the invading army at a safe distance, harassing supply lines, avoiding pitched battles, and gradually wearing down the numerically inferior force. This approach earned Fabius the derisive nickname Cunctator, the delayer, from impatient Romans eager for decisive action. For months, this shadow dance continued across central Italy. Though tactically sound, the Fabian strategy proved politically unsustainable. Roman citizens demanded confrontation and victory, not careful maneuvering. As elections approached, popular sentiment favored aggressive action, leading to the appointment of Gaius Terentius Varro and Lucius Aemilius Paulus as consuls for the coming year. Under pressure to deliver a decisive victory, these new commanders assembled the largest Roman army yet fielded, 8 legions with supporting allies, nearly 80,000 infantry, and several thousand cavalry. They tracked Hannibal's force to Cannae, a village in southeastern Italy where the invaders had established a supply depot. Here, on an August day that would live in military infamy, the opposing forces met on a dusty plain near the Aufidus River. What transpired at Cannae defied conventional understanding of ancient warfare. Outnumbered nearly 2-1, Hannibal arranged his forces in an unconventional formation. He placed his weakest troops, Gallic and Spanish infantry, at the center in a convex arc, while positioning his veteran Libyan heavy infantry on the flanks. His superior cavalry formed the wings, tasked with driving off the Roman horse and then enveloping the enemy rear. As the battle commenced, the Roman center advanced confidently against the seemingly vulnerable middle of the Africans' line. The arc bent backward under pressure but did not break, gradually forming a concave formation that continued to yield ground while maintaining cohesion. Meanwhile, the Punic cavalry routed their Roman counterparts and swung around to the rear of the advancing legions. The trap closed with mathematical precision. As Roman forces pressed deeper into the collapsing center, the veteran Libyan infantry on the flanks wheeled inward. Simultaneously, the returning cavalry sealed the encirclement from behind. The vast Roman army found itself surrounded, compressed into a tightening pocket, where their superior numbers became a critical disadvantage. So densely packed were the legionaries that many could not raise their arms to defend themselves. What followed was systematic annihilation. For hours, the killing continued as the encircled Romans, unable to maneuver or escape, were methodically cut down. When darkness finally ended the slaughter, between 50 and 70,000 Romans and allies lay dead or dying on the field. The consul Paulus perished alongside 80 senators who had taken the field. Varro escaped with a small cavalry contingent, bearing news of a defeat unprecedented in Roman history. Cannae represented not merely a tactical victory, but the perfection of battlefield geometry. Military academies worldwide still study this engagement as the quintessential battle of annihilation. In its aftermath, numerous Italian cities abandoned their Roman allegiance. The great ports of Syracuse in Sicily and Tarentum in southern Italy opened their gates to the invaders. Macedonia's king, Philip V, negotiated an alliance against their common Roman enemy. In the capital, citizens awaited the inevitable assault on their city walls. Survivors reported that the path to Rome lay open, with inadequate forces remaining to defend the Seven Hills. A famous exchange, recorded by ancient historians, allegedly occurred between the victorious general and his cavalry commander, Hannibal. When Hannibal declined to immediately march on Rome, preferring to consolidate his position in southern Italy, Hannibal supposedly remarked, "You know how to win victories, but not how to use them." Whether this strategic decision represented wisdom or lost opportunity would be debated for centuries. What remained indisputable was the profound psychological impact of Cannae, a wound in the Roman consciousness that would never fully heal. For 15 years following Cannae, Hannibal maintained his army on Italian soil, an astonishing feat of logistics and leadership. Without secure supply lines to his homeland, he sustained operations through careful management of resources, alliances with Italian communities, and tactical flexibility. His presence alone forced Rome to maintain multiple armies in the field, draining the Republic's manpower and treasury. Yet even as the Punic general established dominance in southern Italy, Roman resilience manifested in unexpected ways. The Republic's response to catastrophic defeat revealed strengths that would ultimately prove decisive. Unlike other Mediterranean powers that typically negotiated terms after major battlefield losses, Rome refused to consider peace. The Senate declared that no discussions would occur while foreign troops remained on Italian soil. This intransigence transformed the conflict into a test of endurance that played to Roman demographic advantages. Under the guidance of Fabius Maximus, whose cautious strategy gained renewed appreciation after Cannae. Roman forces avoided direct confrontation with Hannibal's main army. Instead, they recaptured defecting cities one by one, punishing those who had abandoned the Roman cause. The message became clear. The invader might win battles, but Rome would inevitably reclaim its territories. Communities contemplating defection had to weigh temporary relief against eventual retribution. Two emerging Roman commanders demonstrated the adaptability that would eventually overcome the Punic threat. Marcus Claudius Marcellus, called the Sword of Rome, balanced Fabian caution with aggressive action when circumstances favored it. After a prolonged siege, his forces recaptured Syracuse in the 12th year of the war, despite defensive works designed by the mathematical genius Archimedes. The brilliant scientist perished during the city's capture, reportedly killed by a Roman soldier while absorbed in geometric calculations. Meanwhile, a more significant threat developed in Iberia, where Carthage's position had weakened following the departure of the main expeditionary force. The young Publius Cornelius Scipio, whose father and uncle had died fighting in the peninsula, received command of Roman forces there despite his youth and limited experience. This exceptional appointment reflected both his family's sacrifice and his natural talents. 3 years later, Scipio's capture of New Carthage demonstrated tactical brilliance worthy of his adversary. Learning that the city's northern defenses were weakly manned due to a lagoon considered impassable, he discovered that the water level dropped significantly during certain winds. During the main assault, he sent a selected force through the temporarily shallow waters, achieving complete surprise and capturing the North African power's capital in Spain, along with its valuable silver mines. Within 3 more years, Scipio had effectively eliminated Punic presence from the Iberian Peninsula, depriving Hannibal in Italy of reinforcements and revenue. Returning to Rome, he proposed a bold strategy, taking the war to Africa itself, forcing the enemy to recall its greatest general to defend the homeland. Though conservative elements in the Senate opposed this plan, Scipio's popular support secured him the consulship and authority to implement his vision. The following year saw the African campaign commence, with Roman legions establishing a beachhead near Utica. Early victories and an alliance with the Numidian prince Massinissa strengthened the Roman position. As Scipio's forces threatened Carthage itself, the ruling council finally recalled Hannibal from Italy, ending his 16-year occupation of Roman territory. His departure from Italian shores represented both tactical necessity and personal heartbreak. The veteran soldiers who had followed him across the Alps, who had triumphed at Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae, who had sustained themselves for years in hostile territory, now withdrew to defend distant shores. As his army embarked from Croton, the general reportedly gazed back at the land where he had demonstrated his genius, knowing he might never return. The climactic confrontation occurred in autumn of the year 202, near the village of Zama. For the first time, the two greatest commanders of their age, the Punic master of mobile warfare and the Roman innovator, faced each other directly. The invader of Italy assembled a force that included veterans from his Italian campaigns, alongside fresh levies and 80 war elephants. Scipio arranged his legions in an unconventional formation, creating lanes through which the charging elephants could pass harmlessly. As the battle developed, Scipio demonstrated that he had studied and internalized his opponent's methods. While the infantry engagement remained undecided, the superior Roman and Numidian cavalry drove their counterparts from the field, then returned to strike Hannibal's rear, exactly as had occurred at Cannae, but with roles reversed. The veteran commander fought brilliantly, but found himself outmaneuvered by a younger general who had learned from his own tactics. This defeat ended the Second Punic War. Carthage accepted harsh terms: surrender of its navy and war elephants, abandonment of all territories outside Africa, payment of a crushing indemnity over 50 years, and a prohibition against waging war without Roman permission. The great maritime power became, effectively, a Roman client state. For the defeated commander, the story continued. Though some urged him to continue resistance, Hannibal advocated peace, recognizing that further conflict would only bring destruction upon his homeland. In the years that followed, he implemented political and economic reforms to help Carthage rebuild, despite Roman restrictions. Eventually, Roman demands for his surrender forced him into exile at the court of Antiochus III of Syria, where he contributed strategic advice during that monarch's ultimately unsuccessful war against Rome. Pursued relentlessly by Roman agents across the Mediterranean, the aging strategist found increasingly precarious refuge in various courts. When his final protector, King Prusias of Bithynia, prepared to surrender him to Rome, he chose poison over captivity. According to Plutarch, his final words acknowledged the implacable enemy that had defined his existence. Let us relieve the Romans from their fear, since they think it long to wait for the death of an old man. Half a century after Hannibal's death, the Third Punic War erupted, having nothing to do with the great commander who had brought Rome to the edge of destruction. This final conflict represented Roman determination to eliminate a recovering commercial rival. After a 3-year siege, Roman forces under Scipio Aemilianus, adopted grandson of Africanus, destroyed the city completely. The ground was sown with salt, the population enslaved, and one of Mediterranean civilization's greatest centers obliterated from the earth. Yet Hannibal's legacy endured far beyond his death or his city's destruction. His tactical innovations influenced Roman military development for centuries. The comprehensive strategy he employed, diplomatic, psychological, and military, established a template for subsequent commanders. Even in defeat, he had forced Rome to evolve, to become more resilient, more adaptive, and ultimately more dominant. Perhaps his greatest monument lies not in stone, but in the intangible realm of human achievement, demonstrating how vision, courage, and intellectual brilliance can enable one individual to challenge an empire. Though ultimately unsuccessful, his 16-year campaign against overwhelming odds remains a testament to the extraordinary possibilities of human will and imagination in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. While swords and spears dominated the physical realm of conflict, an equally consequential struggle unfolded across the diplomatic landscape of the Mediterranean. Throughout the protracted contest between Carthage and Rome, alliances shifted like sand beneath desert winds, with smaller powers calculating their interests against the backdrop of titanic confrontation. Prior to the Alpine descent, Hannibal had secured his rear through systematic cultivation of Iberian tribal loyalties. Unlike previous Punic administrators who ruled through intimidation, the son of Hamilcar recognized the value of cultural respect and personal connection. His fluency in local languages, marital alliance with an Iberian princess, and participation in indigenous religious ceremonies transformed subjugated peoples into willing confederates. This diplomatic acumen extended to Gallic territories, where advance emissaries established connections long before the main force arrived at the Rhone crossing. The Boii and Insubres tribes of northern Italy had recently suffered harsh Roman pacification, their lands confiscated for veteran colonies, their warriors slaughtered for displaying independence. These grievances provided fertile ground for anti-Roman sentiment that the invader skillfully cultivated. After the triumph at Cannae, the strategic chessboard expanded dramatically. Capua, Italy's second largest city, transferred allegiance to the Punic cause, providing urban infrastructure that the predominantly mobile force had previously lacked. Syracuse, long maintained as a nominally independent ally of Rome, despite effective occupation, embraced freedom under King Hieronymus, grandson of the legendary Hiero II. Perhaps most significantly, Philip V of Macedon recognized opportunity in Rome's moment of profound vulnerability. The ambitious Antigonid monarch negotiated a formal treaty with Carthage 3 years after Hannibal's invasion, creating a potential two-front war beyond the Republic's capacity to manage. Had this Macedonian alliance been fully activated rather than merely potential, the outcome of the entire conflict might have differed fundamentally. The Roman diplomatic response revealed institutional strengths that compensated for battlefield defeats. Despite catastrophic losses of manpower and resources, the Senate maintained existing alliances through a combination of inspirational steadfastness and calculated intimidation. When wavering Italian communities contemplated defection, prompt military demonstrations, often involving public execution of pro-Punic factions, reinforced the consequences of disloyalty. More subtly, the Romans exploited ethnic and class divisions within communities under Hannibal's influence. In Capua, they cultivated aristocratic elements who chafed under populist reforms implemented by the invader. In Syracuse, they maintained communication with factions opposed to King Hieronymus's increasingly tyrannical governance. These internal connections proved invaluable when opportunities for counter-revolution emerged. The diplomatic contest extended to peripheral powers with strategic significance. Numidia, whose light cavalry constituted the elite of Carthage's mounted forces, contained rival kingdoms with conflicting interests. The Roman diplomatic corps identified Massinissa, a dispossessed Numidian prince with legitimate grievances against Carthage, as a potential asset. Their cultivation of this relationship would ultimately bear fruit at Zama, where Numidian cavalry transferred allegiance with devastating effect. In the Hellenic East, Roman diplomats neutralized the Macedonian threat through alliance with the Aetolian League, creating sufficient pressure on Philip V to prevent his full engagement in the Western conflict. Simultaneously, they maintained connections with Ptolemaic Egypt, ensuring that Africa's richest grain-producing region remained inaccessible to Punic interests. Perhaps most revealing of diplomatic impact were the events that unfolded in Tarentum, a major Greek port city in southern Italy. Frustrated by Roman garrison forces that restricted their autonomy, prominent citizens secretly communicated with Hannibal's camp, offering to open their gates. During the 12th year of war, this conspiracy succeeded in admitting the invaders' forces, yet the Roman garrison commander had received intelligence of the plot. While unable to prevent the city's fall, he withdrew his forces to the citadel overlooking the harbour, maintaining control of maritime access and effectively neutralizing Tarentum's strategic value. The nuanced diplomatic landscape revealed a fundamental difference between the competing powers. The Punic approach to alliance building centered on the charismatic leadership of one extraordinary individual whose personal guarantees and relationships sustained coalition integrity. The Roman system operated institutionally, with the Senate maintaining consistent policy despite changing magistrates and fluctuating fortunes. This distinction proved consequential as the conflict extended across decades. When Hannibal focused attention on one theatre, alliances in other regions often deteriorated without his personal presence. Roman diplomatic relationships, embedded in institutional continuity, demonstrated greater resilience against the vagaries of individual leadership. The peace terms, imposed after Zama, reflected Rome's understanding of diplomatic reality. By permitting Carthage to retain its core African territories while stripping away external possessions, the Senate created a buffer state dependent on Roman protection against Numidian expansion. By prohibiting independent military action, they transformed a rival into a subordinate ally. By imposing financial obligations over 50 years, they ensured generational alignment of interests. The diplomatic aftermath extended well beyond formal treaties. Hannibal, briefly serving as suffet chief magistrate after the war, implemented governmental reforms that threatened established oligarchic interests. His efforts to reduce corruption and distribute tax burdens more equitably generated powerful enemies who eventually collaborated with Roman factions seeking his elimination. As the defeated general departed his homeland for the final time, seeking refuge at foreign courts, the diplomatic web contracted around him. Roman envoys followed his movements, pressuring successive hosts, Antiochus of Syria, Armenia, Bithynia, to surrender the aging commander. This relentless diplomatic pursuit, conducted while Roman military power expanded eastward into Hellenic territories, demonstrated the Republic's long institutional memory and commitment to eliminating potential threats regardless of time elapsed. The diplomatic dimension of the Punic conflict transcended individual personalities to reshape Mediterranean geopolitics for centuries. What began as competition between commercial powers evolved into Roman hegemony, with former rivals transformed into clients, allies into subjects, and neutral parties into dependents. The diplomatic chessboard, once populated by multiple independent actors, gradually simplified into a unipolar system with Rome at its center. This transformation, as significant as any battlefield outcome, established patterns of international relations that would characterize the Mediterranean world until the empire's distant fall. The legacy of that diplomatic revolution continues to influence concepts of international order, alliance systems, and great power competition in the modern age. Beneath the surface of martial glory and diplomatic maneuvering lay the fundamental economic realities that shaped the protracted struggle between Mediterranean powers. The Punic conflicts represented not merely clashes of armies, but competitions between distinct economic systems, each with inherent strengths and fatal vulnerabilities. The Carthaginian economic model rested upon three pillars: maritime commerce, agricultural estates, and Spanish silver. As Phoenician colonists, their original settlement had been established primarily as a trading hub, strategically positioned to facilitate exchange between the eastern and western Mediterranean. By the mid-3rd century, their commercial network extended from the Black Sea to Britain, with specialized trading vessels carrying textiles, ceramics, precious metals, and agricultural products across established sea lanes. This commercial orientation influenced every aspect of Punic society. Unlike Rome, where political office provided the primary route to social advancement, Carthaginian elites derived status primarily from mercantile success. Their governing council comprised leading merchant families, whose primary allegiance often lay with commercial interests rather than state policy. This created decision-making patterns that prioritized immediate profit over long-term strategic considerations, a tendency the Barcid faction consistently opposed. The agricultural foundation of Carthaginian wealth resided in large North African estates employing advanced farming techniques. These plantations, described admiringly by Roman writers like Cato the Elder, implemented sophisticated crop rotation, irrigation systems, and specialized cultivation methods. The resulting agricultural surplus generated substantial export revenue while supporting the urban population of the capital, which may have reached 500,000 inhabitants during the height of Punic prosperity. Spanish silver mines, particularly those around New Carthage, provided the final economic pillar. The extraction operations, conducted primarily through slave labor under harsh conditions, produced extraordinary wealth, reportedly yielding 300 pounds of silver daily during peak periods. This mineral wealth funded military operations, subsidized diplomatic initiatives, and balanced trade deficits during wartime disruption of maritime commerce. The Roman economic system presented stark contrasts. Agricultural production dominated, with a particular emphasis on small to medium landholdings worked by citizen farmers, who simultaneously constituted the military backbone of the Republic. This structural integration of economic and military functions created remarkable resilience against temporary setbacks. While Hannibal's forces could devastate Italian farmlands, the human capital those lands produced, citizen soldiers committed to defending their patrimony, remained the Republic's decisive resource. Commercial activities held secondary importance in early Roman economic thinking, with patrician elites traditionally disdaining direct involvement in trade. However, the equestrian order, equites, increasingly engaged in commercial ventures, creating an influential constituency advocating for trade protection and expansion. Their interests aligned with territorial expansion, as new provinces offered both markets and resources for commercial exploitation. This structural distinction became evident in responses to the pressure of prolonged conflict. When maritime commerce suffered disruption, Carthaginian state revenues declined precipitously, limiting military options. Conversely, Roman agricultural self-sufficiency, combined with the ability to extract resources from subject territories across Italy, provided greater staying power during extended hostilities. The Second Punic War strained both economic systems to breaking points. For Carthage, the loss of Spanish silver mines after Scipio's Iberian campaign created insurmountable financial difficulties. Without these mineral resources, maintaining mercenary forces in Italy became increasingly untenable, ultimately necessitating the withdrawal of Hannibal's expedition, despite its battlefield successes. Rome faced different challenges. The devastation of Italian agriculture, with some regions experiencing 15 consecutive years of crop destruction, created severe food shortages. Naval blockades intermittently threatened grain imports from Sicily and Egypt. Most critically, the manpower demands of maintaining multiple armies stretched demographic resources to their limits, with some estimates suggesting that 1/3 of military-age Roman citizens perished during the conflict. The Roman response to these pressures revealed institutional creativity that would prove decisive. When normal revenue sources proved inadequate, the Senate implemented emergency measures, including voluntary loans from wealthy citizens, leveraging patriotic sentiment and offering preferential repayment terms. They also engaged in debasement of currency, reducing silver content in coinage to expand money supply. Further measures included deferred payment to military contractors, essentially forcing private entities to finance state operations, and progressive tax structures that placed heavier burdens on elite wealth. Perhaps most indicatively, when the Treasury exhausted all conventional funding sources after Cannae, the Senate urged citizens to donate personal gold and silver for military purposes. The resulting collection provided sufficient resources to continue resistance when defeat seemed imminent, a demonstration of social cohesion that transcended economic rationality. The aftermath of conflict revealed divergent economic trajectories. Rome and Italy, despite massive physical destruction, experienced eventual agricultural revitalization through redistribution of land to veteran soldiers. The capture of Punic territories, particularly Spain and Sicily, provided new economic opportunities through colonization, resource extraction, and tax collection. The influx of war indemnities, paid by Carthage over decades, further stimulated economic development within the expanding Roman sphere. For Carthage, post-war reconstruction efforts faced severe constraints. The loss of external territories eliminated crucial resource bases. Trade routes gradually reoriented toward Roman ports like Ostia, Puteoli, and Syracuse. The prohibition against independent military action prevented responses to Numidian encroachment on agricultural lands. Despite these limitations, the resilient commercial culture adapted through intensified agricultural development and renewed trading initiatives within permitted parameters. The interwar period witnessed an attempted economic renaissance under reformist leadership. Upon returning from exile in the late 1900s, Hannibal applied his strategic acumen to financial matters, implementing reforms, including prosecution of corrupt officials who had embezzled public funds. He also restructured tax collection to ensure revenues reached state coffers and conducted audits of foreign debt obligations to eliminate fraudulent claims. Additionally, he developed state monopolies in key sectors to generate public revenue. These measures proved remarkably effective, enabling Carthage to offer early repayment of war indemnities, a development that paradoxically heightened Roman concerns about renewed Punic economic vibrancy. The Senate's insistence on maintaining the original payment schedule, despite available funds, revealed underlying anxiety about commercial competition, presaging the eventual decision to eliminate the ancient trading power entirely. The Third Punic War reflected economic motivations thinly veiled by security pretexts. As Carthage recovered commercial vitality within the constraints imposed at Zama, Roman economic interests, particularly among equites engaged in competing trade activities, advocated eliminating this resurgent competitor. Cato the Elder's famous declaration that Carthage must be destroyed, Carthago delendo est, resonated with agricultural and commercial factions alike, though for different reasons. The final destruction of the city obliterated an economic system that had flourished for 7 centuries. Specialized knowledge disappeared as skilled craftsmen perished or entered slavery. Trade networks disintegrated as established patterns of exchange collapsed. Agricultural innovations survived primarily through Roman adaptation, as documented in Mago's Agricultural Treatise, the sole Punic literary work Romans considered worthy of preservation and translation. The long-term economic consequences of this civilizational extinction extended far beyond immediate Roman gains. The elimination of Carthage removed a commercial counterweight that had facilitated economic diversity across the Mediterranean basin. Smaller trading states lost negotiating leverage as Roman commercial interests established regional monopolies. The destruction of sophisticated banking and credit systems based in the Punic capital created financial disruptions that persisted for generations. The economic narrative of the Punic Wars thus reveals a fundamental divergence between commercial and agricultural paradigms, between trade networks and territorial control, between mercantile pragmatism and imperial ambition. This underlying economic dimension shaped strategic decisions, determined resource availability, and ultimately influenced outcomes more profoundly than individual battles. In the final accounting, Rome's economic system prevailed, not because it generated greater wealth. Carthage initially commanded vastly superior financial resources, but because it produced greater resilience against sustained pressure. The integration of economic activity with political and military structures created institutional strength that transcended material advantages, establishing patterns that would characterize Western economic organization for centuries to come. Beyond battlefields and diplomatic chambers, the prolonged struggle between Rome and Carthage precipitated profound cultural transformations that would ultimately reshape Mediterranean civilization. The collision between these disparate societies, one rooted in Phoenician mercantile traditions, the other in Latin Italic agrarian values, generated cultural exchanges, appropriations, and reactions that transcended immediate political outcomes. Prior to the initial conflict in the mid-3rd century, Roman culture exhibited remarkable insularity. The nascent republic had assimilated Etruscan and Greek influences, yet maintained distinctive cultural patterns characterized by ancestral reverence, strict patriarchal structures, and civic morality. Religious practices emphasized proper observance of ritual rather than theological sophistication. Artistic expression served predominantly practical functions, with limited attention to aesthetic refinement for its own sake. Carthaginian culture presented striking contrasts. Descended from Phoenician settlers, yet influenced by indigenous North African traditions, Punic society developed sophisticated artistic forms, complex religious systems, and cosmopolitan sensibilities befitting a maritime trading network. The worship of deities like Baal-Hamon and Tanit incorporated elaborate ceremonies, while decorative arts displayed Egyptian, Greek, and Near Eastern aesthetic elements integrated into distinctive styles. The initial phase of cultural interaction occurred primarily through Sicily, where Punic and Hellenistic influences had mingled for centuries. As Roman forces occupied formerly Carthaginian territories, they encountered architectural forms, agricultural techniques, and administrative systems that offered practical advantages over traditional Italian approaches. The pragmatic Roman temperament readily adopted useful innovations while discarding elements deemed decadent or threatening to established values. The invasion of Italy catalyzed unprecedented cultural anxieties within Roman society. As Hannibal's armies penetrated central regions, traditional certainties faltered. Religious authorities interpreted battlefield defeats as divine disfavor, prompting extraordinary ritual responses, including human sacrifice, a practice explicitly rejected under normal circumstances, but recorded by Livy following the disaster at Cannae. Such extreme measures revealed profound psychological disorientation within a society whose cultural framework lacked explanatory models for repeated failure against a seemingly unstoppable adversary. Literary responses to this existential crisis emerged through figures like Quintus Ennius, whose epic poem Annales reframed Roman historical understanding to emphasize manifest destiny and inevitable triumph despite temporary setbacks. This deliberate cultural project, creating narrative coherence from chaotic experience, established patterns of historical interpretation that would influence Roman self-conception for centuries. The prolonged presence of Punic forces in southern Italy introduced direct cultural contact unmediated by previous Hellenistic filters. Citizen soldiers returning to central Italy brought not only battlefield experiences, but exposure to alternative social organizations, religious practices, and technological applications. Archaeological evidence indicates accelerated adoption of Carthaginian agricultural implements, construction techniques, and maritime technologies during and immediately following the conflict. For the multi-ethnic coalition under Hannibal, extended campaigns across diverse Italian landscapes similarly prompted cultural adaptations. The commander's renowned capacity to maintain coalition coherence despite ethnic and linguistic differences required sophisticated cultural intelligence and communicative flexibility. Evidence suggests deliberate adoption of Roman military innovations, particularly regarding camp fortification and siege techniques, demonstrating pragmatic appropriation transcending cultural chauvinism. The resolution of the Second Punic War initiated the most significant phase of cultural interaction. As Roman power expanded through former Carthaginian territories, administrative necessities demanded engagement with established social structures. The Republic's traditional governance models, designed for Italian communities with shared cultural backgrounds, proved inadequate for managing diverse populations across the Western Mediterranean. This administrative challenge generated new cultural syntheses. In Sicily, Roman governors incorporated elements of previous Carthaginian provincial administration, while imposing distinctively Roman legal frameworks. In Spain, where Punic influence had transformed indigenous communities, Roman authorities retained effective governance systems, while gradually introducing Latin cultural elements through veteran colonies and commercial interactions. Literary and artistic dimensions reflected these complex interactions. Rome's first native historian, Quintus Fabius Pictor, composed his account of the conflict in Greek rather than Latin, an acknowledgement that engagement with the wider Mediterranean world required cultural adaptations. Simultaneously, the first translations of Greek literary works into Latin occurred during this period, indicating recognition that Roman cultural expression required enrichment to address expanded imperial responsibilities. Hannibal, during his brief political career following the conflict, implemented administrative reforms influenced by Roman models, while maintaining distinctive Punic institutional structures. His deep familiarity with Roman society, gained through 16 years of warfare on Italian soil, informed governance approaches that selectively incorporated effective elements from the victorious adversary while preserving cultural continuity. Religious transformations perhaps most clearly demonstrated the complex cultural interactions triggered by the protracted conflict. Traditional Roman religious practice centered on transactional relationships with deities who protected the state, encountered alternative models through prolonged exposure to Hellenistic and Punic religious systems. The aftermath of war witnessed accelerated adoption of Eastern cults, most notably the Magna Mater, Cybele, whose worship received official sanction during the final phases of the conflict, following consultation of the Sibylline books. This religious openness represented not abandonment of traditional practices, but their supplementation through cultural appropriation. The capacity to incorporate useful religious elements from defeated adversaries while maintaining core cultural identity exemplified Roman adaptive capabilities. Significantly, however, the Senate explicitly rejected aspects of Punic religion associated with child sacrifice, demonstrating selective rather than wholesale cultural adoption. The final destruction of Carthage in the mid-2nd century paradoxically ensured the preservation of certain Punic cultural elements through their incorporation into emerging Roman imperial culture. Agricultural techniques documented in Mago's treatise on farming received authoritative status through senatorial endorsement of the work's translation. Architectural and engineering principles developed in North Africa informed Roman construction practices throughout newly acquired territories. Maritime commercial networks established by Carthaginian traders provided templates for expanded Roman commercial activities. The cultural legacies of this centuries-long encounter extended far beyond immediate participants. As Rome expanded into Hellenistic Eastern territories, administrative approaches developed for managing former Carthaginian possessions informed governance strategies applied to these new provinces. The multiculturalism necessitated by imperial expansion had been rehearsed through engagement with Punic cultural traditions, establishing precedents for selective incorporation rather than wholesale imposition of Latin models. For subsequent generations, the Punic conflict acquired mythic significance within Roman cultural memory. Cato the Elder's obsessive repetition of Carthago delenda est indicated how thoroughly the rival power had penetrated Roman consciousness. Literary treatments by Virgil, Livy, and Silius Italicus transformed historical events into cultural touchstones that reinforced Roman self-conception as a people destined for universal dominion through superior virtue rather than mere military prowess. Hannibal himself underwent cultural transformation within this narrative framework, simultaneously representing both the quintessential adversary and a figure of tragic nobility. Cicero's philosophical dialogues presented him as embodying virtues Romans admired: strategic brilliance, personal austerity, unwavering commitment, while remaining the essential other against whom Roman identity defined itself. This cultural construction transcended historical reality to fulfill psychological needs within Roman society. Perhaps most significant for subsequent Western civilization was the emergence of cultural models for imperial governance that balanced pragmatic flexibility with core value preservation. The Roman encounter with Carthaginian civilization demonstrated possibilities for cultural exchange that neither erased distinctive identity nor prevented effective administration of diverse populations. This precedent informed subsequent imperial projects across millennia, from Byzantine adaptation of Roman models to early modern European colonial endeavors. The cultural dimensions of the Punic conflict thus extended far beyond immediate participants to shape fundamental patterns of cross-cultural interaction throughout Western history. What began as collision between distinct Mediterranean societies ultimately produced synthetic cultural forms that transmitted elements of both traditions through subsequent centuries. In this respect, Carthage achieved a form of immortality despite physical obliteration, its cultural DNA integrated into the imperial system that had ensured its destruction. 2 millennia after the final stones of Carthage were scattered and its fields sown with salt, the reverberations of the Punic Wars continue to shape our understanding of history, strategy, and human potential. The multifaceted legacy of this ancient conflict transcends its immediate outcomes to influence military thought, political development, and cultural imagination across centuries. In the military realm, the tactical innovations demonstrated throughout the conflict established paradigms that would define Western approaches to warfare for generations. The Battle of Cannae, that masterpiece of battlefield geometry, remains required study at military academies worldwide. Its double envelopment maneuver reappeared throughout subsequent military history, from Frederick the Great's oblique assault at Leuthen to Moltke's encirclement at Sedan, to Schwarzkopf's left hook during Desert Storm. Beyond specific tactical arrangements, Hannibal's campaign in Italy established conceptual foundations for maneuver warfare, strategic deception, and psychological operations. By consistently operating against Roman expectations, crossing supposedly impassable terrain, appearing where logistically impossible, maintaining cohesion among disparate forces, the Punic commander created an intellectual framework for asymmetric warfare that would influence military thinkers from Sun Tzu to T.E. Lawrence. The Roman response to these innovations proved equally influential for subsequent military development. Fabius Maximus's strategy of delay and attrition, initially derided yet ultimately vindicated, established the concept of trading space for time when facing superior battlefield opponents. This approach would reappear throughout military history, from Kutuzov against Napoleon to Soviet resistance against Nazi invasion. The very term Fabian strategy entered the lexicon of military science, honoring its originator while obscuring the Carthaginian adversary who necessitated its development. Perhaps most significantly, the ultimate Roman victory, despite crushing tactical defeats, demonstrated the crucial distinction between winning battles and winning wars. This lesson that strategic patience and systemic resilience can overcome tactical brilliance remains central to comprehensive security thinking in the modern era. Contemporary military educators often cite the Punic conflict when emphasizing that victory requires alignment of tactical, operational, and strategic levels of warfare. In political realms, the conflict's legacy proved equally profound. The existential challenge posed by Hannibal's invasion catalyzed institutional developments within the Roman Republic that both strengthened and ultimately undermined its constitutional structure. The emergency powers granted to dictators like Fabius established precedents for executive authority that would later enable figures like Sulla and Caesar to transform the Republic into autocracy. More subtly, the expansion of Roman power following the conflict fundamentally altered relationships between citizens, allies, and subjects. The incorporation of former Carthaginian territories initiated transformations in governance approaches that would gradually evolve into the provincial system of the later empire. The encounter with diverse populations and administrative traditions necessitated flexibility that both enriched and challenged traditional Roman political culture. For subsequent political theorists, the conflict provided essential case studies in competing systems. Machiavelli devoted significant attention to the Punic Wars in his Discourses on Livy, contrasting the stability of Rome's republican institutions with the mercantile pragmatism of Carthaginian governance. His analysis established interpretive frameworks that influenced Renaissance political thought and subsequent republican theory throughout the Enlightenment. The economic consequences reverberated across centuries as well. The destruction of Carthage eliminated a commercial counterweight that had facilitated economic diversity across the Mediterranean basin. Rome's subsequent economic hegemony reduced commercial competition while expanding wealth extraction from provincial territories. This centralizing tendency established patterns of core-periphery economic relationships that characterized imperial systems well into the modern era. More positively, the technological and agricultural innovations preserved from Punic civilization enhanced productive capacity throughout Roman territories. Irrigation techniques, crop rotation systems, and specialized cultivation methods documented in Margot's treatise improved agricultural yields across regions from North Africa to Gaul. Maritime technologies adopted from Carthaginian shipbuilding traditions facilitated expanded Mediterranean commerce under the Pax Romana. The cultural legacy proves perhaps most enduring, yet subtle. The narrative of Hannibal's resilience against overwhelming odds, maintaining resistance for 16 years on enemy soil without regular supply lines or reinforcement, established an archetype of the brilliant underdog that resonates across cultural traditions. From contemporary Roman acknowledgement of the adversary's genius to Renaissance reinterpretations to modern cinematic treatments, the Carthaginian commander emerged as the quintessential worthy opponent whose defeat only magnifies the victor's achievement. This cultural construction served multiple purposes across historical contexts. For Romans themselves, the existential threat posed by such an extraordinary opponent justified extreme measures taken in response, from human sacrifice after Cannae to the complete destruction of Carthage decades after the immediate danger had passed. For subsequent European powers with imperial ambitions, the narrative provided models for understanding encounters with civilized adversaries as distinguished from barbarian opponents. Literary treatments across centuries reveal this persistent fascination. Livy's account established the foundation for subsequent interpretations, portraying Hannibal as embodying both admirable qualities, strategic brilliance, personal discipline, and alien characteristics, foreign religious practices, Punic faithlessness. This complex portrayal allowed Roman audiences to simultaneously respect and reject the adversary, a psychological mechanism reproduced in countless subsequent cultural narratives of worthy enemies. The Renaissance rediscovery of classical sources generated renewed interest, with figures like Petrarch and Machiavelli finding in the Punic conflict essential lessons for their contemporary circumstances. Artistic representations from this period frequently depicted the Carthaginian commander, alongside Alexander and Caesar, as exemplars of military genius, though often with subtle visual cues distinguishing the foreign figure from his classical counterparts. Enlightenment historians approached the conflict through emerging frameworks of rational analysis, with Montesquieu examining how environmental and institutional factors influenced respective strengths of the competing powers. His analysis of how commercial and agricultural economic bases generated different military capabilities established interpretive approaches that influenced subsequent historical methodology. The Romantic period witnessed particular fascination with the Alpine crossing, which emerged as the quintessential example of human will triumphing over natural obstacles. J.M.W. Turner's painting, Snowstorm, Hannibal and his army crossing the Alps, 1812, captured this interpretation, presenting the event as a sublime confrontation between human determination and elemental forces. This artistic treatment paralleled contemporary achievements like Napoleon's similar Alpine crossing, demonstrating how historical narrative informed understanding of present actions. Modern cinematic and literary treatments continue this cultural processing, with each generation finding aspects of the conflict that resonate with contemporary concerns. The persistent fascination with asymmetric warfare, resistance against imperial power and individual genius, confronting institutional strength ensures ongoing relevance across changing political landscapes. Perhaps most profoundly, the conflict's legacy lives in historical methodology itself. Edward Gibbon, whose Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire established foundations for modern historical analysis, identified the seeds of Rome's ultimate dissolution in the very victories that established its dominance. His examination of how triumph over Carthage eliminated the external threat that had enforced internal cohesion established essential interpretive frameworks for understanding imperial cycles. Archaeological investigations continue revealing new dimensions of this ancient confrontation. Recent discoveries along the Alpine crossing route have confirmed details from classical accounts while providing fresh insights into logistical challenges and engineering solutions. Underwater archaeology in Mediterranean harbours has recovered Punic and Roman vessel designs, illuminating the naval dimensions often overshadowed by famous land campaigns. For contemporary strategic thinkers, the conflict offers persistent relevance through its demonstration of how asymmetric capabilities generate strategic dilemmas that transcend technological contexts. The fundamental challenge faced by institutional power confronting adaptive genius, by territorial defenders opposing mobile attackers, by hierarchical structures engaging networked adversaries. These dynamics reappear across historical circumstances despite changing technological environments. The final legacy may lie in philosophical reflections on human potential itself. Hannibal's campaign represented an achievement at the outer boundaries of logistical, organizational, and leadership possibility for its historical context. The capacity to maintain coalition coherence among ethnically diverse forces, to sustain operations without secure supply lines, to adapt tactics to varying circumstances while maintaining strategic focus. These accomplishments remind subsequent generations of extraordinary human capability in the face of overwhelming challenges. Simultaneously, the Roman response demonstrated equally remarkable human qualities through different expressions: institutional resilience, collective sacrifice, strategic patience, and adaptive learning. The competition between these different manifestations of human excellence, individual genius versus collective strength, innovative disruption versus institutional adaptation, offers insights into the diverse expressions of human potential that transcend the specific historical circumstance. Thus, 22 centuries after Zama, the confrontation between Rome and Carthage continues informing our understanding of military affairs, political development, economic systems, cultural interaction, and human possibility. What began as conflict between Mediterranean powers evolved into an essential reference point for understanding Western civilization itself, a testament to how thoroughly this ancient struggle shaped the world we inhabit today. Beyond tactical brilliance and strategic vision, beyond the commander who traversed Alps and humbled Rome, stood a human being whose personal qualities and inner life remain tantalizingly elusive, yet central to understanding his extraordinary achievements. The historical figure emerges from ancient sources as a complex individual whose character transcended the simplistic portrayals of either Roman demonization or modern heroic mythology. Born into the prominent Barcid family around 247 BC, the future general inherited both exceptional privilege and extraordinary burdens. His father Hamilcar, having preserved Carthaginian independence during the mercenary revolt through sheer military genius, cast a monumental shadow over his son's development. Contemporaries noted the physical resemblance between father and child. The same piercing gaze, the same austere bearing, the same capacity for inspiring loyalty among diverse followers. Yet unlike many children of exceptional figures who falter beneath parental expectations, young Hannibal seems to have absorbed his father's qualities while developing distinctive capabilities beyond martial skill. Ancient sources emphasize his intellectual cultivation, particularly his fluency in Greek philosophical traditions and mastery of multiple languages, including Greek, Latin, and various Iberian dialects. This linguistic versatility enabled direct communication with diverse coalition forces, eliminating the distortions of translation that plagued many ancient commanders. His personal habits reflected disciplined austerity rather than the luxurious indulgence often associated with Carthaginian elites. Polybius, generally hostile to Punic interests, yet committed to historical accuracy, describes how Hannibal shared the hardships of common soldiers, sleeping on the ground, eating simple rations, exposing himself to the same environmental challenges faced by his troops. This practiced simplicity fostered connection with diverse forces, while demonstrating leadership through example rather than privilege. Even hostile Roman sources acknowledged his extraordinary self-discipline regarding physical appetites. Unlike Alexander, whose brilliant campaigns were punctuated by legendary feasts and drinking bouts, the Carthaginian maintained consistent moderation in food, wine, and sexual activity. This temperance served practical military purposes, maintaining clear judgment under pressure and preserving physical stamina during extended campaigns, while embodying philosophical principles he had absorbed through Hellenic education. Marriage patterns reveal both cultural adaptability and political calculation. His primary union with an Iberian aristocratic woman cemented crucial tribal alliances while demonstrating respect for local customs. However, Livy mentions additional companions who travelled with the army, suggesting adherence to Carthaginian aristocratic practices of maintaining multiple households. This balance between cultural accommodation and maintenance of Punic identity characterized his broader approach to coalition management. Perhaps most revealing were his relationships with subordinates, where ancient sources suggest an unusual combination of authority and accessibility. Unlike Roman commanders who maintained rigid status distinctions, he regularly consulted with officers regardless of social background, valuing practical expertise above hereditary rank. This meritocratic approach enabled identification and promotion of exceptional talents like Hannibal, whose cavalry leadership proved decisive in numerous engagements. His celebrated strategic vision derived partly from extraordinary physical courage that permitted personal reconnaissance of terrain. Rather than relying solely on scouts, he frequently conducted forward observations himself, gaining intimate familiarity with topographical features that informed subsequent battle plans. This willingness to share frontline dangers earned profound respect from common soldiers, while providing tactical insights unavailable through delegation. Emotional discipline complemented intellectual capacity in defining his leadership style. Polybius recounts how, even after the devastating loss of his right eye, during the Arno marshland crossing, he maintained calm determination that steadied wavering troops. This emotional self-regulation, particularly the ability to master natural fear without suppressing empathy, enabled clear decision-making under extreme pressure while preserving human connection with subordinates. His treatment of prisoners revealed a pragmatic approach unconstrained by ideological hatred. After Cannae, he released Roman allies without ransom while keeping Roman citizens for exchange, demonstrating psychological understanding of alliance dynamics. This selective clemency served strategic purposes by encouraging further defections while preserving options for eventual negotiation. The character trait, perhaps most frequently noted by ancient writers, was his capacity for adaptability without compromising core objectives. Throughout the Italian campaign, he modified tactical approaches based on changing circumstances, shifting from direct confrontation against aggressive consuls to evasion when facing Fabian delaying tactics. This tactical flexibility manifested within consistent strategic vision, revealing a mind capable of balancing immediate adaptation with long-term purpose. His intellectual engagement extended beyond military matters into governance during his brief political career. After returning to Carthage following defeat, he implemented financial and administrative reforms that challenged entrenched corruption. His opposition to oligarchic self-enrichment demonstrated commitment to civic welfare rather than personal advancement, though this principled stand ultimately contributed to his political vulnerability. The family relationships that shaped his early development continued influencing his later actions. His profound loyalty to younger brothers, Hasdrubal and Margot, whom he incorporated into military command structures despite their youth, reflected the familial solidarity cultivated by Hamilcar. This tight-knit fraternal bond provided trusted lieutenants, while occasionally limiting objective assessment of their capabilities. Religious attitudes reveal complex dimensions beyond simplistic portrayals in hostile sources. While Roman accounts emphasized alien, Punic practices, contemporary evidence suggests sophisticated engagement with diverse traditions. He demonstrated respect for local deities when traversing different territories, conducted appropriate sacrifices before significant undertakings, yet maintained philosophical distance characteristic of educated Hellenistic aristocrats. This religious adaptability paralleled broader cultural flexibility while adhering to familial traditions, particularly the oath sworn in childhood. Perhaps most poignantly, ancient accounts suggest evolving psychological responses to eventual defeat. The transition from unrivaled battlefield commander to political reformer to hunted exile required remarkable psychological resilience. Unlike many ancient figures who chose ceremonial suicide following reversal of fortune, he continued constructive engagement with circumstances through diplomatic service to Eastern monarchs and military advisory roles that preserved his expertise for subsequent deployment. His final act, choosing poison over surrender to Roman pursuers, reflected consistent commitment to personal agency rather than despair. Plutarch's account of his final words, acknowledging Rome's fear of an old man, contained both bitter recognition of implacable enmity and subtle critique of a power that perceived existential threat in a single aging individual without armies or resources. The psychological portrait that emerges transcends both Roman demonization and romantic heroization to reveal a figure of extraordinary human complexity. His combination of tactical brilliance with cultural adaptability, physical courage with emotional regulation, strategic vision with practical flexibility, intellectual sophistication with personal austerity, presents a character whose diverse capacities integrated into exceptional leadership. Beyond specific accomplishments, his life embodied philosophical questions central to human experience. The relationship between individual capability and institutional constraints, between inherited obligation and personal choice, between tactical adaptation and strategic consistency, between cultural flexibility and core identity. These tensions, navigated with remarkable effectiveness throughout his career, elevate his significance beyond military history into broader understanding of human potential. Modern psychological assessment must acknowledge evidentiary limitations while recognizing consistent patterns in surviving accounts. The capacity to maintain emotional equilibrium while adapting to radically changing circumstances suggests exceptional psychological integration. The ability to inspire diverse populations across cultural and linguistic boundaries indicates remarkable empathic capabilities alongside analytical intelligence. The sustained commitment to strategic vision, despite tactical setbacks, reveals uncommon persistence without rigidity. Perhaps most profoundly, his life illustrates how exceptional human capability transcends reductive categorization. Neither simply military genius nor political leader, neither purely Carthaginian nor adaptively multicultural, neither traditional aristocrat nor revolutionary reformer, Hannibal embodied integration of seemingly contradictory qualities into coherent individuality that defied contemporary expectation and continues challenging historical assessment. The man behind the legend thus emerges as more remarkable than the mythology itself, a fully human figure whose extraordinary capabilities developed through education, experience, and self-discipline, rather than divine dispensation. His story reminds us that history's most profound impacts often emanate not from superhuman figures, but from individuals who develop exceptional qualities through sustained cultivation of diverse capabilities, integrated through uncommon purpose and applied with unwavering commitment despite overwhelming opposition. 2 millennia after his death, this enduring legacy, the fully human quality of extraordinary achievement, perhaps constitutes his most significant contribution to our understanding of historical possibility and human potential. While land campaigns dominate popular understanding of the Punic conflicts, the maritime dimension proved equally decisive in determining ultimate outcomes. The struggle for Mediterranean naval supremacy shaped strategic possibilities, limited operational options, and frequently determined the course of these civilization-defining wars. At the conflict's outset, the disparity between the combatants' naval capabilities appeared insurmountable. Carthage possessed generations of maritime expertise, with specialized vessel designs, experienced crews, and established naval infrastructure extending throughout the Mediterranean basin. Their quinqueremes, massive warships propelled by coordinated banks of oars, represented the pinnacle of ancient naval engineering, while their navigational knowledge enabled operations in conditions that deterred less experienced sailors. Rome, conversely, entered the First Punic War with minimal naval tradition. Its previous conflicts had been resolved through land operations against continental opponents, with maritime activities limited to coastal patrol and merchant protection. The Republic possessed few purpose-built warships and lacked personnel trained in naval tactics or the specialized knowledge required for fleet management. This initial disparity makes subsequent developments all the more remarkable. According to Polybius, whose account remains our most reliable source, Romans encountered a beached Carthaginian vessel and used it as a template for rapid shipbuilding. Within months, they had constructed a fleet of over 100 warships, despite lacking prior experience with such vessels. This extraordinary mobilization of resources demonstrated institutional capacity for adaptation that would characterize Roman responses throughout the conflict. Recognizing their crews' inexperience in traditional naval maneuvering, Roman engineers developed an innovation that transformed maritime combat. The corvus, raven, a boarding bridge with metal spike, allowed Roman vessels to grapple enemy ships, converting naval engagements into infantry actions, where legionary training provided advantage. This technological adaptation neutralized Carthaginian expertise in ramming tactics while leveraging existing Roman military strengths. The naval battle at Mylae demonstrated this approach's effectiveness. Gaius Duilius, commanding the newly constructed Roman fleet, defeated experienced Carthaginian forces through systematic use of the corvus, allowing legionaries to board enemy vessels. The Senate awarded Duilius the first naval triumph in Roman history, establishing precedent for celebrating maritime victories alongside traditional land campaigns. Subsequent naval operations fluctuated between success and catastrophe for both powers. The Roman victory at Ecnomus, involving nearly 330 ships and over 150,000 men, ranks among history's largest naval engagements in the pre-modern era. Yet nature proved as dangerous as enemy action, with a storm the following year destroying over 280 Roman vessels returning from Africa, causing approximately 100,000 casualties, a demographic catastrophe exceeding any single battlefield defeat. These environmental hazards influenced strategic calculation throughout the conflict. Mediterranean weather patterns, particularly winter storm cycles, imposed operational constraints that moderated year-round naval operations. Supply convoys required careful timing and escort arrangements, while amphibious landings necessitated season-appropriate scheduling. Commanders who disregarded these natural limitations, like Publius Claudius Pulcher at Drepana, often suffered devastating consequences. The First Punic War's resolution hinged on naval power rather than land campaigns. The decisive battle at the Aegates Islands witnessed the Roman fleet under Gaius Lutatius Catulus intercept a Carthaginian supply convoy attempting to reinforce besieged positions in Sicily. The resulting victory severed Punic logistics, rendering their remaining territorial possessions unsustainable and forcing acceptance of peace terms that included substantial fleet reductions and territorial concessions. The interwar period witnessed divergent naval development patterns. Carthage, adapting to treaty restrictions, redirected maritime resources toward commercial expansion while maintaining sufficient naval presence to protect trade routes. Rome, conversely, consolidated its newly acquired naval capabilities through infrastructure development, establishing fleet bases at Ostia, Puteoli, and Messana, while maintaining construction facilities for fleet replenishment. These developmental trajectories influenced the Second Punic War's operational parameters. Recognizing Rome's established naval superiority, Hannibal purposefully avoided maritime confrontation during his advance on Italy. His unprecedented Alpine crossing represented not merely tactical innovation, but strategic necessity. The Mediterranean had become a Roman lake, requiring land-based approaches for successful penetration of Italian territory. Throughout the 16-year Italian campaign, this naval disadvantage constrained Punic strategic options. Reinforcement and supply required circuitous routes vulnerable to interdiction, while communication with Carthage remained irregular and unreliable. The Roman capacity to maintain multiple theatres simultaneously, operating in Spain, Sicily, and Italy without significant logistical constraints, derived directly from maritime dominance that enabled resource transfer between operational zones. The naval dimension proved particularly significant regarding Syracusan alignment. King Hero II had maintained alliance with Rome throughout the First Punic War, providing crucial logistical support and intelligence. Following his death, his grandson Hieronymus realigned with Carthage, providing them potential naval facilities in eastern Sicily. The subsequent Roman recapture of Syracuse under Marcellus, despite defensive works designed by Archimedes, preserved their maritime supremacy while denying Carthaginian forces a potential supply base. Similar strategic considerations influenced operations regarding Tarentum, whose harbour offered the finest natural port in southern Italy. When Tarentine conspirators admitted Hannibal's forces, the Roman garrison commander withdrew to the citadel overlooking the harbour entrance. From this position, his forces prevented effective utilization of port facilities while maintaining communication with Roman naval forces operating offshore. This stalemated position neutralized Tarentum's strategic value, despite nominal Carthaginian control of the city itself. The maritime dimension reached its decisive phase with Scipio's African expedition. The transport of over 35,000 troops across potentially hostile waters represented a logistical achievement possible only through absolute naval supremacy. During subsequent operations, continuous supply lines maintained Roman offensive capacity while preventing Carthaginian naval interference with the expeditionary force. Throughout the Third Punic War, naval operations assumed central importance during the final siege of Carthage. Despite treaty restrictions limiting their naval forces, the desperate defenders constructed a new fleet in secret, excavating an alternative harbour outlet to bypass the Roman blockade. This engineering achievement briefly disrupted Roman operations, but proved insufficient against overwhelming maritime superiority. The historical significance of these naval dimensions extends beyond specific tactical outcomes to influence broader military development. Rome's transformation from continental power to maritime empire established organizational precedents for subsequent imperial expansion. The integration of naval and land operations developed during Punic conflicts provided templates for projecting power across the Mediterranean basin throughout the Republican and imperial periods. Technological adaptations arising from naval competition similarly influenced subsequent developments. Ship construction techniques, harbour engineering, and navigational methods advanced substantially through wartime innovation and post-conflict consolidation. These improvements facilitated the expanded maritime commerce that characterized the Pax Romana, demonstrating how military necessity generated capabilities with broader economic applications. Perhaps most significantly, the naval dimension illuminates institutional differences between the competing powers. Carthage's initial maritime advantages derived from specialized knowledge concentrated within particular social groups and families, creating expertise vulnerable to disruption. Rome's systematic approach to naval development, standardizing vessel construction, formalizing training procedures, and establishing permanent infrastructure, created institutional capabilities transcending individual knowledge or experience. This contrast reflected broader distinctions in governmental organization that ultimately proved decisive across all dimensions of the protracted conflict. The Roman capacity to absorb catastrophic losses, sustain multiple operational theaters, and maintain strategic coherence despite changing leadership derived from institutional strengths rather than individual brilliance. In this respect, the naval dimension perhaps most clearly demonstrates how Roman organizational systems eventually prevailed against the individual genius that had initially threatened their existence. Among the most vivid elements of the Carthaginian military apparatus, the war elephants that accompanied their expeditionary forces have captured imagination across centuries, while raising profound questions about ancient military logistics, animal training, and psychological warfare. These massive creatures, primarily North African forest elephants rather than the larger Indian species, constituted a distinctive component of Punic battlefield operations, with complex practical and symbolic dimensions. Carthaginian adoption of elephants as military assets originated following encounters with Pyrrhus of Epirus, whose campaigns in Sicily introduced these formidable creatures to Western Mediterranean warfare. Recognizing their battlefield potential, Punic commanders incorporated captured specimens into their forces during the latter stages of the First Punic War. The practice expanded substantially during subsequent conflicts in Africa, where specialized units for capturing, training, and deploying these animals developed within the military structure. The practicalities of maintaining war elephants required extraordinary logistical systems. Each animal consumed approximately 200 to 300 pounds of fodder daily, necessitating elaborate supply arrangements even during peacetime operations. Training facilities near Carthage included specialized enclosures, dedicated handlers, mahotes, and breeding programs to ensure continuous availability. The substantial investment in this military asset reflected both practical utility and symbolic projection of power through exotic display. During combat operations, elephants fulfilled multiple tactical functions. Their primary battlefield role involved disrupting enemy formations through direct charge, with their massive weight and momentum creating breaches in infantry lines that cavalry or light infantry could exploit. Secondary applications included elevated platforms for missile troops, mobile command positions providing enhanced visibility, and psychological intimidation of both enemy soldiers and horses unaccustomed to these creatures. The famous Alpine crossing presented unprecedented challenges for elephant management. Historical accounts suggest the expeditionary force departed New Carthage with 37 animals, a substantial detachment representing significant logistical commitment. The difficulties these creatures encountered during mountain transit exceeded even human hardships, with specialized forage requirements proving particularly problematic in alpine environments lacking suitable vegetation. Ancient sources describe ingenious solutions for particularly treacherous passages, including wooden platforms constructed to provide stable footing across unstable terrain. The loss rate proved substantial nonetheless, with only a handful, perhaps as few as 7, surviving to operational deployment in Italy. This devastating attrition rate raises questions about the strategic calculus behind including these high-maintenance assets in the expedition, suggesting their psychological impact may have outweighed practical battlefield utility. That psychological dimension became evident during early Italian engagements, particularly at the Trebia River, where surviving elephants contributed significantly to routing Roman cavalry unaccustomed to their sight, sound, and smell. Contemporary accounts emphasize the panic induced among Roman horses, whose instinctive flight response disrupted cavalry formations and compromised battlefield coordination. This psychological advantage diminished over time as Roman forces developed countermeasures, and familiarity reduced the initial terror effect. Archaeological and textual evidence reveals sophisticated equipment developed for elephant warfare. The animals typically wore protective head armor, fabric or leather body coverings, and decorative elements that enhanced their already intimidating appearance. Specialized saddle structures accommodated multiple warriors, while control systems involved mahots using distinctive tools for directing movement amid chaotic battlefield conditions. Contrary to popular depictions, these creatures rarely carried substantial structural towers during active combat. Evidence suggests that while modest wooden fighting platforms accommodated several warriors, the massive castles depicted in later artistic representations would have compromised mobility and stability. Contemporary military manuals and battlefield accounts describe more practical arrangements prioritizing maneuverability over elaborate superstructures. Roman counter-elephant tactics evolved rapidly through practical experience. Initial encounters generated disproportionate casualties, as unfamiliar legionaries faced these biological siege engines without effective response protocols. By the later stages of the Second Punic War, Roman commanders had developed sophisticated countermeasures, including specialized formation adaptations, creating corridors through which charging elephants could pass without disrupting overall battle lines. They also deployed dedicated anti-elephant troops equipped with axes for attacking leg tendons, spears for targeting vulnerable eyes and trunks, and incendiary devices exploiting the animal's fear of fire. The Romans further refined their approach by implementing portable obstacles deployed to channel elephant movements into predetermined zones where they could be isolated and neutralized. They also employed acoustic techniques, using trumpets and other loud instruments to confuse the animals and disrupt their handlers' control signals. The psychological impact extended beyond immediate battlefield effects to influence broader strategic thinking. The prospect of encountering these massive creatures affected Roman recruitment, training priorities, and equipment modifications. Unfamiliar Italian communities facing potential elephant attacks experienced anticipatory terror disproportionate to actual threat levels, influencing alliance decisions and diplomatic calculations. Perhaps most significantly, the symbolic associations of elephant warfare extended beyond practical considerations to shape cultural narratives. For Carthaginian forces, these creatures represented visible manifestations of exotic power and imperial reach, connecting their military with ancient traditions of Near Eastern and North African warfare. For Roman observers, they symbolized the fundamental foreignness of their adversary, reinforcing conceptual distinctions between familiar Italian adversaries and the alien Punic threat. This symbolic dimension finds expression in contemporary artistic representations. Roman commemorative coinage frequently depicted elephants as shorthand for Carthaginian forces, while triumphant generals who had defeated forces employing these creatures prominently featured captured specimens in victory processions. Family names, like Caesar, may derive from encounters with these animals, suggesting their profound impact on Roman cultural imagination. During the Third Punic War, elephants played minimal practical roles, but retained symbolic significance. Scarce resources and treaty restrictions had effectively eliminated Carthage's elephant corps, yet Roman propaganda continued emphasizing these creatures in justifying aggressive action. This persistence demonstrates how thoroughly the association between Carthage and elephants had penetrated Mediterranean consciousness, transcending actual battlefield presence. Modern archaeological research has clarified long-standing questions regarding the species employed. Contrary to earlier assumptions, evidence now suggests Carthaginian forces primarily utilized the smaller North African forest elephant, Loxodonta africana ferroensis, rather than Asian specimens, Elephas maximus. This distinct subspecies, now extinct, stood approximately 8 to 9 feet at the shoulder, substantially smaller than modern African bush elephants, but still formidable from ancient infantry perspective. The final disappearance of this subspecies may relate directly to Roman-Carthaginian conflict. Following their ultimate victory, Roman elites developed appetite for exotic animal displays in public games, creating market demand that accelerated hunting pressure on North African elephant populations. By the 2nd century AD, the subspecies had effectively vanished, a collateral ecological casualty of imperial expansion and changing entertainment preferences. For military historians, the Carthaginian employment of elephants raises enduring questions about cost-benefit analysis in weapon systems. The extraordinary resource requirements, specialized personnel needs, and operational limitations of these living weapons must be balanced against their tangible battlefield contributions and psychological impact. This calculation mirrors modern debates regarding high maintenance, specialized military assets whose psychological effect may exceed their practical utility. The legacy of these magnificent creatures extends beyond military applications to influence cultural understanding across centuries. Their presence in ancient Mediterranean warfare generated literary descriptions, artistic representations, and commemorative references that preserved their memory in Western consciousness long after their practical employment had ceased. From Hannibal's crossing to modern cultural references, these war elephants remain perhaps the most vivid symbol of a civilization and military system long vanished from the earth. Every legendary adversary necessitates an equally remarkable response. For Rome, confronting history's greatest military strategist required developing their own exceptional commander, a figure whose life and career would mirror his opponent in striking ways while embodying distinctly Roman virtues. Publius Cornelius Scipio, later honored with the cognomen Africanus, emerged as the instrument of Roman resilience and ultimate triumph, his biography intertwining with Hannibal's from their first battlefield encounter to the decisive confrontation that determined Mediterranean supremacy. Born to the distinguished Cornelii Scipiones, a patrician family with extensive military traditions, young Publius experienced the Carthaginian threat as personal tragedy rather than abstract concept. During the initial Italian campaign, he reportedly saved his wounded father at the Ticinus River, a 17-year-old youth demonstrating exceptional courage that foreshadowed later achievements. 4 years afterward, both his father and uncle perished fighting in Spain, creating both personal motivation for continued resistance and opportunity for unprecedented early command. The Senate's decision to entrust Spanish operations to this 25-year-old represented extraordinary deviation from traditional practice. Roman military advancement normally followed strict age requirements through the cursus honorum sequence of offices, with major commands reserved for experienced former consuls. The appointment of this untested youth to independent proconsular command revealed both the devastating personnel losses Rome had suffered and recognition of his exceptional qualities. His initial Spanish campaign revealed psychological insight, distinguishing him from conventional Roman commanders. Rather than immediately seeking battlefield confrontation, he recognized the importance of undermining enemy morale and building coalition relationships. Upon arrival in Spain, he devoted substantial effort to cultivating local allies, learning indigenous customs, and demonstrating respect for Iberian cultural traditions. This approach, strikingly similar to methods employed years earlier by Hannibal, generated diplomatic advantages that complemented military operations. The capture of New Carthage demonstrated tactical brilliance comparable to his opponent's greatest achievements. Learning that the seemingly impregnable city featured lower walls along the lagoon side due to presumed natural protection, he discovered that strong offshore winds periodically lowered water levels, creating temporary access. Timing his primary assault to distract defenders, he dispatched a specialized force through the briefly shallow waters, achieving complete surprise and capturing the principal Carthaginian base in a single day. His treatment of captives following this victory revealed both political sophistication and personal magnetism. Spanish hostages, held by Carthaginian forces to ensure tribal loyalty, received immediate release without ransom, generating goodwill among indigenous communities. Female captives, including a renowned beauty, reportedly offered for his pleasure, received respectful protection and restoration to families or fiancés, creating personal narrative that enhanced his reputation for self-discipline and honor among potential allies. The systematic Spanish campaign culminated at Ilipa, where he demonstrated mastery of the tactical deception methods previously used against Roman forces. For several days, he established predictable patterns of troop deployment, with Roman legionaries in the center and Spanish auxiliaries on the wings. On the decisive day, he reversed this arrangement while ordering unusually early deployment, forcing his opponents to hurriedly arrange their forces in anticipated formation without adequate breakfast. The resulting victory effectively eliminated organized Carthaginian presence from the Iberian Peninsula. His return to Rome initiated political controversy that revealed tensions between traditional authority structures and emerging military individualism. Despite unprecedented success, he faced opposition to his proposal for directly attacking North Africa. Conservative senatorial elements, particularly Fabius Maximus, advocated continued focus on Italian operations rather than high-risk expeditionary warfare. The resulting compromise, authorization without adequate official resources, forced him to recruit volunteer forces motivated by personal loyalty rather than state authority. The African expedition began with Scipio, applying lessons learned from previous Carthaginian successes against Roman forces. Rather than seeking immediate confrontation with primary enemy forces, he established secure operational base near Utica, while cultivating crucial alliance with Numidian Prince Massinissa, whose cavalry would prove decisive in subsequent operations. This measured approach reflected strategic patience uncharacteristic of previous Roman commanders, who had often rushed toward confrontation with disastrous results. The climactic engagement at Zama represented perfect synthesis of Roman adaptation and individual genius. Having studied his opponent's tactics through both personal experience and systematic analysis of previous battles, he arranged forces specifically to counter anticipated Carthaginian approach. His formation incorporated deliberately wide spacing between manipular units, creating passages through which charging elephants could pass without disrupting overall battle integrity. Having neutralized this threat, his infantry engaged the Carthaginian center, while superior cavalry particularly Numidian forces under Massinissa, executed the decisive envelopment maneuver so often previously used against Roman armies. The peace terms he imposed reflected both strategic vision and pragmatic restraint. While eliminating Carthaginian capacity for offensive military action through fleet restrictions and prohibition of independent warfare, he resisted proposals for complete destruction advocated by hardliners like Cato. This moderation, maintaining Carthage as functional buffer state against Numidian expansion, while focusing indemnities on financial rather than territorial concessions, demonstrated political sophistication, extending beyond battlefield victory to sustainable post-conflict environment. His subsequent career illuminated both the possibilities and limitations of exceptional individuals within republican institutional structures. The cognomen Africanus, granted by popular acclaim, marked unprecedented personal distinction, while triumph celebrations reached extraordinary scale. Yet traditional aristocratic factions, concerned about individual prominence threatening collective authority, eventually manufactured corruption charges against both him and his brother, Lucius, following the Antiochian War. His final years witnessed withdrawal from public life to personal estates, a retirement reflecting disgust with political machinations rather than military defeat. The parallels between these commanders extended beyond battlefield accomplishments to personal characteristics. Both demonstrated exceptional linguistic capabilities, with Scipio's reported fluency in several Iberian dialects matching his opponent's multilingual diplomacy. Both maintained personal austerity and physical discipline that fostered connection with common soldiers. Both combined tactical flexibility with strategic consistency, adapting battlefield approaches while maintaining overarching objectives. These shared qualities suggest how extraordinary historical circumstances called forth extraordinary individuals on both sides of the conflict. Yet crucial differences reflected distinct cultural contexts from which each emerged. Where Hannibal operated within familial framework established by his father, drawing authority from Barcid faction rather than state institutions, Scipio functioned within constitutional structures, despite occasional tension with traditional authority. Where his opponent's allegiance prioritized personal oath and family tradition, the Roman leader, despite individual brilliance, ultimately subordinated personal ambition to republican institutions, accepting political defeat without attempting military intervention in civic affairs. This distinction perhaps explains their divergent ultimate fates. The defeated Carthaginian spent his final years as hunted exile, moving between increasingly marginal courts as Roman influence expanded eastward. Scipio, despite political setbacks, maintained his position within Roman society, his military achievements forming foundation for family prominence that would extend through subsequent generations. The system that produced him incorporated his contributions without being fundamentally threatened by his individual prominence. The legacy of Scipio Africanus extends beyond specific victories to influence Roman military development for centuries. His systematic incorporation of allied contingents, particularly specialized forces like Numidian cavalry, established templates for utilizing provincial auxiliaries that would characterize imperial armies. His balance of traditional Roman strengths with tactical innovations derived from opponents created synthesis between conservative institutional values and necessary adaptation to changing circumstances. Perhaps most significantly, his career demonstrated how republican institutions could produce leadership matching individual brilliance of autocratic systems. Where Hannibal represented singular genius operating within constraining structures, Scipio exemplified how constitutional systems could identify, develop, and deploy exceptional talent without compromising fundamental governance principles. This capacity, fostering individual excellence while maintaining institutional integrity, would prove crucial to Roman success across subsequent centuries of expansion and consolidation. The intertwined narratives of these extraordinary commanders thus transcend personal biographies to illuminate fundamental attributes of their respective civilizations. Their parallel careers, culminating in direct confrontation that determined Mediterranean hegemony, reveal how historical circumstances elicit exceptional individuals while systems determine their ultimate impact. In this respect, Scipio Africanus represented not merely Rome's answer to an unprecedented threat, but embodiment of the Republican synthesis between individual capability and collective resilience that would ultimately outlast even the greatest individual opponent. 50 years after Zama's decisive battlefield had determined Mediterranean supremacy, an elderly Roman senator would conclude every speech, regardless of the topic under discussion, with the same implacable phrase: Ceterum censeo Carthaginem esse delendam. Moreover, I consider that Carthage must be destroyed. Marcus Porcius Cato, known to history as Cato the Elder, had visited the North African city as part of a diplomatic mission and returned to Rome deeply disturbed by what he had witnessed. Against all expectations, Carthage had recovered remarkable prosperity, despite the punitive peace terms imposed after the Second Punic War. The commercial expertise and maritime trading networks that had initially built Carthaginian power had gradually reasserted themselves, creating renewed economic vitality that alarmed Roman observers. The agricultural innovations documented in Margot's treatise had revitalized North African production, generating substantial export revenue despite territorial limitations. Most significantly, the governmental reforms implemented during the brief political career of Hannibal had reduced corruption and improved fiscal management, allowing early repayment of war indemnities. This economic renaissance occurred precisely when Rome faced increased challenges managing its expanding imperial possessions. The Republic's governance structures, designed for city-state administration, strained under the demands of provincial management across the Mediterranean basin. Corruption among governors, exploitation by publicani, tax collectors, and resistance from subject populations created administrative burdens that contrasted unfavorably with Carthaginian administrative efficiency. For conservatives like Cato, this comparative stability represented implicit critique of Roman governance rather than admirable recovery. The specific catalyst for the final conflict emerged from ongoing border disputes between Carthage and neighboring Numidia. Under King Massinissa, Rome's crucial ally during the Second Punic War, Numidian forces systematically encroached upon Carthaginian territory, claiming disputed regions through combinations of historical precedent and simple opportunism. The peace terms forbidding Carthage from military action without Roman permission created an impossible situation. Each appeal to Rome for intervention resulted in commissions that generally favored Numidian claims, while demanding Carthaginian compliance. By the early 1500s, Carthaginian patience with this systematic dismemberment expired. After particularly egregious Numidian annexation of valuable agricultural territories in the Bagradus Valley, Carthage assembled military forces for territorial defense, a clear technical violation of treaty terms. The resulting conflict proved disastrous, with Carthaginian forces suffering comprehensive defeat due to 5 decades of military neglect. This violation, however justified by circumstances, provided legal pretext for Roman intervention. The Senate dispatched delegation demanding extraordinary concessions as punishment for treaty violations. These included surrendering 300 children from elite families as hostages and transferring all military equipment to Roman control. Desperate to avoid another devastating conflict, Carthaginian authorities complied with these humiliating requirements, delivering both hostages and massive quantities of weapons to demonstrate submission. What followed revealed the true Roman intentions. Having secured both Carthaginian hostages and disarmament, Consul Lucius Marcius Censorinus delivered the final demand. The entire population must abandon their city and relocate at least 10 miles inland, permanently surrendering their connection to the sea that had sustained their civilization for 7 centuries. This requirement, effectively demanding cultural suicide, revealed that no level of compliance would satisfy Roman determination to eliminate their ancient rival. Faced with extinction regardless of choice, the Carthaginian population chose resistance despite overwhelming odds. A remarkable civilian mobilization transformed the disarmed city into improvised arsenal. Women donated their hair for catapult ropes, metal ornaments for weapons, and temple decorations for armor. Craftsmen converted agricultural implements into military equipment, while abandoned mines and workshops became production facilities for replacement armaments. Within months, the supposedly disarmed population had created substantial defensive capabilities through sheer determination and technical ingenuity. The siege that commenced proved unexpectedly challenging for Roman forces. The city's formidable defenses, triple walls reaching heights of 40 feet, with integrated towers and complex defensive zones, had been continuously improved since the previous conflict. The artificial harbour facilities contained sophisticated docking arrangements and defensive installations that complicated naval blockade. Most significantly, the defenders' desperate commitment created resistance intensity that surprised attacking forces accustomed to quick capitulation when facing overwhelming odds. Initial Roman operations suffered from inadequate preparation and overconfidence. Consul Manius Manilius attempted premature assault without proper siege equipment, resulting in significant casualties against determined defenders. Naval operations under Censorinus similarly encountered difficulties when Carthaginian countermeasures, including fireships and improvised naval vessels, disrupted blockade efforts. These early setbacks damaged Roman morale while reinforcing defender determination. The campaign's character transformed with appointment of Publius Cornelius Scipio Aemilianus, adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, as commander. Recognizing the siege's challenging nature, he implemented systematic approach focusing on complete isolation rather than direct assault. His forces constructed massive circumvallation works spanning the entire landward approach to the city, while improving naval blockade through continuous patrol operations. This methodical strategy prioritized starving defenders into submission rather than costly direct engagements. The defenders responded with extraordinary measures, demonstrating their desperate innovation. Engineers constructed new harbour outlet through solid rock, concealing the operation from Roman observers until completed. This engineering marvel briefly disrupted naval blockade by providing exit route for newly constructed vessels assembled in inner harbour facilities. Though ultimately insufficient against overwhelming Roman naval superiority, this achievement symbolized the technical ingenuity that had characterized Carthaginian civilization throughout its existence. The final assault commenced in spring, focusing on the Kothan harbour district, where defensive works had weakened due to extended privation. Roman forces established initial foothold in this sector, then engaged in systematic urban combat, moving toward the Bursa citadel at the city's heart. Contemporary accounts describe ferocious house-to-house fighting through narrow streets, with defenders contesting every structure, despite deteriorating circumstances. The conclusion featured horrific civilian suffering as remaining population concentrated within the citadel area. When Roman forces finally breached these ultimate defenses, they encountered mass suicide among remaining elites unwilling to face enslavement. The city commander Hasdrubal surrendered to save his family, prompting his wife's public denunciation before she immolated herself and their children, rather than accept Roman domination. This final gesture, witnessed by Scipio himself, provided fitting conclusion to civilization that had chosen extinction over subjugation. The treatment of captured Carthage established precedent for Roman handling of particularly significant opponents. Under senatorial directive, Scipio implemented complete destruction rather than conventional occupation. Surviving structures underwent systematic demolition, with building materials scattered to prevent reuse. Agricultural land received ritual application of salt, symbolically rendering it barren for future cultivation. The surviving population entered slavery, dispersed throughout Roman territories, to eliminate possibility of community reconstitution. This extraordinary annihilation, extending beyond military defeat to cultural eradication, reflected deeper Roman anxiety than conventional historical treatments suggest. The systematic removal of Carthaginian achievements, including destruction of their libraries, with sole exception of Mago's agricultural treatise, indicated determination to eliminate not merely a rival power, but alternative civilizational model that had demonstrated resilience despite previous defeats. Archaeological evidence confirms contemporary accounts regarding destruction thoroughness. Excavations reveal destruction layer containing evidence of intense fires, reaching temperatures sufficient to melt metal objects. Human remains show patterns consistent with massacre rather than conventional battle casualties. The city's magnificent harbour installations, renowned throughout the Mediterranean, underwent methodical dismantling that rendered them permanently inoperable. The aftermath witnessed fundamental regional transformation. The territory became Africa Province, first trans-Mediterranean addition to Rome's expanding imperial system. Julius Caesar would later propose colonial resettlement at the site, implemented after his assassination as Colonia Julia Carthago. This Roman city, built atop the destroyed Punic predecessor, eventually became provincial capital and major urban centre, though bearing no cultural continuity with the civilization it replaced. For Roman collective consciousness, Carthage's destruction represented both triumph and cautionary example. Polybius records Scipio's famous statement while watching the city burn. "A glorious moment, Polybius, but I have a dread foreboding that someday the same doom will be pronounced upon my own country." This recognition that imperial powers might themselves face similar fate revealed awareness that the historical processes unleashed through Mediterranean hegemony contained potential cyclical patterns. The eliminated Carthaginian civilization, Phoenician in origin, African in location, multicultural in composition, represented alternative development pathway within Mediterranean context. Its commercial orientation, religious practices, governmental structures, and technological approaches had offered distinct model from the militarized agrarian system that replaced it. The thoroughness of its eradication ensured that subsequent regional history would develop along exclusively Roman parameters. Perhaps most significantly, the Third Punic War demonstrated how thoroughly security concerns had become self-fulfilling prophecy. The systematic Roman dismantling of Carthaginian recovery options following the Second Punic War had created precisely the desperate circumstances that eventually justified complete destruction. This pattern, imposing impossible constraints upon defeated opponents, then citing their inevitable resistance as justification for annihilation, would reappear throughout subsequent imperial history. The destroyed civilization's final legacy perhaps lies in how thoroughly its obliteration has served as cautionary example of absolute defeat. The very phrase Carthaginian peace, denoting settlement conditions designed to permanently eliminate an opponent rather than merely defeat them, derives from this historical episode. The salting of fields, whether literally implemented or symbolically interpreted, represents the ultimate extension of victory beyond military defeat to civilizational erasure. 22 centuries after its implementation, this thorough destruction continues generating archaeological challenges. Recent excavations utilizing modern techniques have revealed previously unrecognized Punic cultural elements surviving beneath Roman construction layers. These discoveries suggest that despite extraordinary efforts at complete eradication, aspects of Carthaginian civilization persisted through incorporation into successor cultures. A reminder that even the most determined attempt at cultural annihilation rarely achieves absolute success. In the shadowed confines of the United States Naval War College, officers gather to analyze ancient battles whose lessons transcend technological evolution. At West Point and Sandhurst, cadets trace maneuvers executed on dusty plains over 2 millennia past. In corporate boardrooms, executives study strategic principles developed for conflicts fought with spear and sword. The Punic Wars, particularly the extraordinary campaigns of Hannibal Barca, continue providing intellectual frameworks for understanding conflict, leadership, and strategic thinking across diverse contexts in our contemporary world. This persistent relevance stems from the conflict's foundational nature in Western military and political development. The challenges faced by both Rome and its North African adversary, asymmetric capabilities, multicultural coalition management, resource allocation across multiple theaters, balancing tactical flexibility with strategic consistency, remains central to modern organizational leadership, despite radical transformations in technology and social structures. The enduring fascination with these ancient struggles transcends historical interest to inform practical approaches across disciplines. Military professionals find particular value in studying the tactical innovations demonstrated throughout the conflict. The double envelopment at Cannae remains the quintessential battlefield maneuver, demonstrating perfect coordination between center and wings while exploiting momentary positional advantage. The Lake Trasimene ambush illustrates principles of terrain utilization and deception that remain applicable across technological contexts. The Roman adaptation following these defeats, developing counter-tactics while maintaining institutional cohesion, provides essential case study in organizational learning under extreme pressure. Beyond specific engagements, these campaigns demonstrate enduring principles of operational art that transcend technological evolution. Hannibal's approach to logistics, living off conquered territories while maintaining strategic mobility, established paradigms for force projection that influenced commanders from Napoleon to Patton. The Roman system emphasized secure supply lines, standardized equipment, and replacement protocols that would characterize modern military organization. These contrasting approaches continue informing contemporary debates regarding mobility versus security in expeditionary operations. Strategic studies programs worldwide particularly value examining how each power leveraged distinctive strengths while addressing critical vulnerabilities. The Punic emphasis on superior generalship, coalition warfare, and operational mobility reflected realistic assessment of demographic limitations and commercial priorities. The Roman focus on institutional resilience, standardized training, and strategic persistence similarly aligned with their agricultural foundation and citizenship structure. This alignment between strategic approach and underlying societal characteristics remains central to effective security planning across historical contexts. Political scientists and international relations theorists find equally valuable lessons in the diplomatic dimensions of the protracted conflict. The management of alliance systems, neutralization of potential threats through preemptive diplomacy, and calibration of peace terms to achieve sustainable outcomes, rather than merely punitive satisfaction, all represent challenges that persist in contemporary geopolitics. The evolution from bipolar Mediterranean system to Roman hegemony offers instructive parallel to modern transformations in international order. Leadership studies across disciplines, military, political, corporate, educational, draw inspiration from the contrasting leadership models exemplified by principal figures. Hannibal's approach emphasized individual brilliance, holistic understanding across domains, military, cultural, psychological, and adaptability within consistent strategic vision. The Roman system developed distributed leadership capabilities through standardized training, clear organizational structures, and promotion based on demonstrated competence. These different leadership philosophies, individual genius versus institutional excellence, continue informing organizational design and leadership development across sectors. Technological innovation during the conflict similarly provides templates for understanding adaptation under competitive pressure. The Roman development of the Corvus, boarding bridge, to neutralize Punic naval superiority represents classic example of asymmetric response to technological disadvantage. The engineering solutions during the Alpine crossing demonstrate how determined leadership can overcome environmental constraints through technical creativity. These historical cases inform contemporary approaches to technological disruption and competitive innovation in fields ranging from military modernization to corporate competition. Business strategists have particularly embraced lessons from these ancient conflicts. The contrast between the Mediterranean trading network, flexible, opportunity-focused, innovation-friendly, and Roman agricultural military complex, standardized, process-oriented, scale-advantaged, presents instructive parallel to contemporary competition between agile disruptors and established industry leaders. The ultimate Roman victory through institutional resilience, rather than brilliant leadership, offers cautionary lessons regarding sustainable competitive advantage versus temporary brilliance, a distinction that remains central to business longevity. Popular culture continues processing these historical events through creative reinterpretation. Cinema has repeatedly attempted capturing the dramatic potential of the Alpine crossing, though technical and budgetary constraints have limited full realization of this spectacular achievement. Historical novels exploring the conflict, from Flaubert's Salammbô to Ross Lecky's Hannibal, continually reimagine these events for successive generations, often reflecting contemporary concerns regarding imperialism, cultural clash, and exceptional leadership. Archaeological investigations continue enriching understanding through material evidence that complements literary accounts. Recent excavations along Alpine routes have identified encampment sites confirming aspects of ancient descriptions while providing new insights into logistical challenges. Underwater archaeology near Sicilian waters has recovered rams from warships engaged in First Punic War naval battles. The ongoing excavation of ancient Carthage itself, beneath the modern Tunisian capital, continues revealing cultural sophistication that challenges traditional narratives of civilizational hierarchy. Digital humanities approaches have enabled new analytical perspectives through computational examination of ancient sources. Network analysis techniques applied to diplomatic relationships, documented in classical texts, illuminate alliance patterns previously obscured by narrative focus on primary powers. Geographic information systems integrated with archaeological data enable more precise reconstruction of campaign movements, revealing logistical constraints and opportunities that influence strategic decisions. These approaches demonstrate how technological innovation in research methodology continues enhancing understanding of even well-documented historical events. Educational applications extend beyond military academies to broader pedagogical contexts. The narrative arc of the conflict, featuring exceptional individuals, dramatic reversals, ethical dilemmas, and civilizational consequences, provides exceptional teaching vehicle for developing critical thinking skills. The complex interaction between individual agency and structural factors challenges simplistic historical interpretation, while demonstrating how contingent factors shape long-term outcomes. These qualities make the Punic Wars particularly valuable for educational approaches emphasizing analytical skills rather than mere factual transmission. Ethical dimensions receive increasing scholarly attention as contemporary concerns influence historical interpretation. The Roman decision to completely destroy Carthage raises questions regarding proportionality in conflict termination and cultural erasure as policy instrument. The willingness to sacrifice civilian populations during the final siege similarly provokes examination of leadership ethics under existential threat. These historical cases provide valuable perspective for contemporary ethical discourse regarding civilizational conflict, cultural preservation, and legitimate war termination. Perhaps most profoundly, these ancient conflicts continue illuminating fundamental questions regarding human nature and social organization that transcend specific historical circumstances. The tension between individual brilliance and institutional resilience, between innovative disruption and systemic persistence, between cultural diversity and centralized efficiency. These dialectical relationships revealed through the Punic struggle remain central to understanding human affairs across contexts. The 21st century faces challenges that would seem entirely alien to participants in these ancient conflicts: climate change, artificial intelligence, bioengineering, space exploration. Yet the fundamental questions regarding how societies organize themselves, how they respond to existential threats, how they balance innovation with stability, and how they develop leadership capable of addressing complex challenges remain remarkably consistent across millennia. In this respect, the echoes of those distant conflicts continue resonating, not merely as historical curiosity, but as profound exploration of persistent human challenges. The dust of Cannae, the rocks of Alpine passes, the ruins of the ancient North African metropolis may belong to antiquity, but the principles revealed through these struggles remain eternally relevant to understanding the human condition. As long as societies face existential challenges requiring exceptional leadership, strategic vision, and organizational adaptation, the Punic Wars will continue providing intellectual frameworks for understanding our contemporary world.